Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story tonight is about India's latest military signaling in Ladakh. According to reports in the Indian media, IAF flew its Rafale fighter jets in Ladakh and what was branded as familiarization sorties. 5 Rafales, which were formally inducted into service at the Ambala Air Base on 10 September, conducted some sorties in Ladakh in recent days. The pilots flew from Ambala to familiarize themselves with the operational environment. The deployment of French-made Rafale jets in Ladakh came less than 10 days after they were formally inducted into the IAF. Tensions are high in the undemarcated border areas in eastern Ladakh since May this year. Troops from China's People's Liberation Army and Indian Army are facing each other at multiple points in the theater. In a particularly bloody skirmish on the night of June 15th, at least 20 Indian soldiers, including the commanding officer of the unit, were killed, dozens injured, and at least 10 personnel taken prisoners by the PLA. Several rounds at the military and diplomatic levels have been conducted so far, including between the defense and foreign ministers of China and India. The last such round produced a 5-point agreement high on intentions but low on substance. Tonight's discussion will cover 2 aspects: the technical operational view of aerial capabilities on both sides and the broader political strategic picture in view of the current tensions. For the first, we have with us former Air Vice Marshal Faaiz Amir. VM Amir, an F-16 pilot, has had the privilege of also commanding PF, Premier Tactics Development Institute, the Combat Commanders School. For the second part of the discussion, we'll be joined by, in fact, we have been joined by former Foreign Secretary Ambassador Riaz Khokhar. Now, Ambassador Khokhar has been Pakistan's High Commissioner to India, Pakistan's Ambassador to the US, and also Pakistan's Ambassador to China. So he is uniquely placed to actually look at this triangle in a way that perhaps very few people can. But let me begin with AVM Amir in terms of the capabilities. Now, my first question to you, sir, is that 5 Rafales obviously don't make a strike package. What exactly could be the signaling here, or is it just simply a familiarization exercise with no actual hostile intentions?
Well, all fighter pilots and all over the world in periods of tension, they fly closer to border or in the border areas to familiarize themselves with that terrain that they would be operating in future. In this particular case, these were border FAM areas where probably the Rafale pilots wanted to see their airborne radar performance, particularly performance of their air-to-ground radar site, the part of it, so that when it comes to weapons employment, how would their radar operate? And moreover, probably in this particular sortie, I also think that they made some landing approaches close to on the Leh airfield. Now, why did they do that? Is probably for 2 reasons. One is the morale of the local people. They wanted to boost that. And second, the morale of the thousands of Indian Army soldiers. When they would hear the noise of this aircraft Rafale, or they would hear about it, definitely that's a morale booster for the soldiers. Now, particularly when those soldiers see a very long, daunting winter ahead, for which they are ill-equipped, because they were employed in emergency. So what I see is Indian forces trying to boost the morale of their own people. Now, why the media is so much? Why the Indian media played so much? I think there are three probable reasons besides that morale boosting. First is to distract the 1.3 billion people's attention away from COVID-19, where the Modi government has definitely not performed well, and it is all over the media, all over the print and electronic media. Second is the shrinking economy, which Mr. Modi came as a champion of boosting its economy. I think this particular time when his economy has shrunk by 24%, they needed some distraction. And this is one of those distractions that they brought Rafale to the border areas and then given them full media coverage. The third one is, which is more military in nature, the land mass that they have lost to China in this since April skirmishes. So probably they wanted to distract their own people for these very reasons, the reasons of economy, the poor performance in COVID, and the land thousands of kilometers lost to the Chinese Air Force, Chinese people.
Right. I have various other questions, of course, on the technical side. As I said, we're going to discuss the capabilities on both sides also in terms of the platforms. But let me pull in Ambassador Khokhar. Ambassador Khokhar, as I said in my opening, you are uniquely placed in terms of, looking at this triangle. You've got China, India, and also, incidentally, the US, which is a very important, increasingly very important strategic partner of India, and also has its own approach towards China. But let's begin with China first. Lots of things are being said about why China has done this in Ladakh. Give me your sense of what do you think the thinking behind this was?
Ejaz, if we look at facts objectively, it's not China that has started this particular problem.
Right.
It is going back, it's India that is totally responsible for having taken the actions on August 19, 2019, by its actions in Kashmir and by declaring Ladakh as a union territory. And also the stupid statement made by the Indian Indian Home Minister in the Lok Sabha, where he said that we have done all this thing, now we will be recovering our territories from AJK and Gilgit-Baltistan and Aksai Chin.
Yeah.
Now, this is the crux of the matter. This, of course, clearly involves China in a big way, and it's very interesting that while we took some time to react, the Chinese reacted instantly, and they said that this action of the Indian government in Kashmir and by declaring or that it will take over Aksai Chin is unacceptable. They repeated this thing not once but 2 or 3 times and made it very clear that this is a violation, a grave violation by India. So I think let's be very clear that it's India that started this whole affair. Secondly, I think the Indians, in a way, somewhat repeated the mistakes of 1962. This is a part of their sort of forward policy, and they were building up infrastructures, they were building up placements for their soldiers, and they thought that they could do this without being noticed. But also the period, August was the time when they acted, so maybe the Chinese were not prepared to act the way they wanted to act. So between August and let's say April or May, the Chinese decided to build up and to restore what they thought was their rightful, legitimate claim along the LAC. In fact, now LAC, frankly, doesn't really exist. It's just a notional thing. And the Chinese are very clear as far as their objectives are concerned. They are no longer talking about LAC. If you see the latest statement of the India-China statement issued from Moscow, they do not talk about LAC. They talk about border areas,
correct,
which is very flexible. And there is no reference to LAC at all, and there is no reference to returning to the status quo. They have talked about very general terms, very, very diplomatic, but as you very rightly pointed out in your very introductory remarks, not substantive. Things happen only on the ground when they are substantive. So at the moment, clearly the Indians have taken a very provocative action, and the Chinese had no choice but to react. And I personally think, Chinese are very cautious. Generally, they are very cautious. And as you know, that out of the 14 neighbors that China has, they've settled borders with 12. And the only two exceptions are India and Bhutan. Bhutan wants to settle, but it's India does not allow them to breathe. This is the problem. I think the Bhutanese are very sensible, wonderful people, and very peaceful, and they would like to have some kind of an adjustment with the Chinese. But Indians are preventing them from doing that. So in a way, let's say if it's a question of talking about responsibility, the responsibility is that of India.
Right. This is a very interesting point. In fact, for the viewers, since Ambassador Khokhar has gone into the history, the fact is that, and this is one of the deeply ironic facts, that the term line of actual control was actually used by the Chinese Premier Chu En-lai in a letter to then Indian Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and Mr. Nehru rejected that. But the term found its way in the 1993 agreement between India and China, and as the ambassador pointed out, the 5-point agreement in Moscow between the Indian Foreign Minister and the Chinese Foreign Minister talks about border areas, does not refer to the line of actual control. I'm going to come back with a reference to settled or unsettled borders, Ambassador Khokhar, but let me go back to AVM Amir here. AVM Amir, so when the Indians made the deal with the Assoc for the Rafale, they had also asked for some India-specific enhancement in the fighter jet. And these included the helmet-mounted sights, included radar warning receiver, radio altimeter, Doppler radar, and the ability to start up the fighter without assistance in extremely cold areas such as Ladakh. So, does this give you a sense that they were, in terms of the acquisition, not just looking at Pakistan but also at China?
Well, this contract for the Rafale was signed in 2016, and at that moment probably they were not, the situation was not so volatile. So, but definitely India wanted an aircraft, and India wanted value for its money, and they also put in the requirement of high altitude operation from the high altitude airfields that they have. But these all modifications are upgrades, Indian upgrades, are scheduled to take place after all the aircraft have been delivered in 2021. Thereafter, the French Dassault Aviation, they have scheduled further upgrades, and these aircraft will definitely be. But let me give you a slight hint here. The Rafale is termed as a 4.5 generation aircraft.
Correct.
And these are only 36 aircraft. And these will be equipped with Meteor and Mika missiles in the air-to-air role. When you look at the Chinese inventory, they have about 500 aircraft which are of fourth generation. And all those aircraft are equipped with PL-15 missiles, which are better than the Meteor as far as the range is concerned. So these 36 aircraft, while India might be thinking that it would give her the edge in northern areas of the high altitude operations, I think China is much well equipped with this Su-30s, Su-35s, J-10, J-11, J-16, and now the 5th generation aircraft J-20, which is probably equivalent to the F-22 of USAF. So while the Indians have rightly asked their aircraft to be upgraded, but I think that is not so much a match to the Chinese PLA Air Force.
I'm happy you mentioned PL-15. In an earlier program, we were discussing the BVR, the Beyond Visual Range capability, and the fact that Meteor is being looked at as one of the top shelf air-to-air BVR missile. But PL-15, I believe, when the Chinese actually demonstrated it, the USAF was very concerned about it, and they actually sent a request to Congress saying that they needed more R&D to develop or increase the range of their own BVR missiles, AMRAAM and the rest. So give me some sense of PL-15, because I'm assuming, or at least there have been reports, that we would also probably be carrying these PL-15s on our JF-17s.
Yes, the PL-15 has a claimed range of 200 plus kilometers, and it operates with the modern radar, which is electronically scanned array radars, ESA radars, which probably are there, which is a part of JF-17 Mark III, and which is always already there on the J-20 of the Chinese inventory. As compared to that, the F-16 or the American AMRAAMs have a claimed range of between 80 to 120 kilometers, and probably towards the lower than the 100 mark. And then the French Meteor has about a claimed range of 100 kilometers. Now, but there's a difference in technology. The Meteor definitely has a better engine and better thrust regulation during the flight than the PL-15. But PL-15 on 500 Chinese aircraft, modern aircraft, frontline aircraft, definitely outfights and outdoes the Indian Meteor on only 36 aircraft, of which they only have 5 at the moment.
Right. And again, I'm happy because, you know, it's great to get someone who can talk about the technicalities. The Meteor, as you mentioned, has got a ramjet air-breathing engine. But there is another weapon system on the Rafale, which is the Mika, as you mentioned. Now, Mika is shorter range, but very useful in close combat because it approaches the target in a passive mode. Is that something which the Chinese also have in terms of close range, shorter range missiles?
Mika is an old generation aircraft, and I studied it at length when Pakistan was planning to acquire Mirage 2000-5. Mika has both models, one in the radar guided and as well as the thermal seekers. It's a very potent missile. It's a very good missile in close as well as BVR in the BVR role. But probably definitely it falls short on the Meteor. But when you have the combination of a Meteor and Mika dual sensors, I think that is a potent weapon system to face. But today, what you look at the air battle, which is going to be tomorrow's air battle as well, it is increasingly extending its envelope outwards. It means the larger the ranges of the BVR missiles, lesser are the chances of getting into close combat.
Correct.
And we do not see close combat in future unless the bravado takes the better of the pilots.
Right. I have other questions also, but let me go back to Ambassador Khokhar. Ambassador Khokhar, regarding the settled and unsettled borders. Now, one of the things that we need to do, in fact, is to understand the importance of putting out a narrative. India, as you mentioned, China has settled borders with everyone, except two. One is India, one is Bhutan. And as you rightly mentioned, Bhutanese want to settle this, it's just the Indians. So essentially, we're talking about just India. Now, India, on the other hand, has unsettled borders with all neighbors. And in fact, although it doesn't have any direct borders with Sri Lanka, if we factor in the Tamil problem, then there's a problem there also with the Bangladeshis, with Nepal. Right now, as you know, the relations are nosediving with Pakistan, with China. So this is a country that obviously it could have problem with one state, and one could say that, okay, that one state is also equally responsible for it, but with everyone. Now, that's a narrative that needs to be put out. Would you agree with that? And do you think we're putting that out?
Ejaz, India has always had a very aggressive attitude towards territories and boundaries and border issues. First of all, as you know, they occupied whatever they wanted to after the British India partition. Internally, they took over Hyderabad, Junagadh, Manavadar, and then in '61 they took over Goa. So they have this thing. Then Sikkim. Now the problem with India is that they think that they are going to be the principal dominating power in South Asia, whether small countries around India like it or not. They have a problem, very major problem with Pakistan. They have a problem with Nepal. They have a problem with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, as even tiny Maldives, by the way.
Yeah.
So they have issues with everybody.
Yeah.
So it's clearly that India is out of step with the region. It's also somewhat linked to their great vision that they've developed about Akhand Bharat, extending from Saputra to Malacca. So it's a very chauvinistic and kind of a revisionist position that they are taking with countries. Now you referred to the 1959 agreement. Now, the Chinese position is actually stated in that letter that you referred to. But on instructions from Mao, Zhou Enlai approached Nehru and said, let's settle. We will accept the McMahon line and you settle with us in Ladakh, the Aksai Chin area. But Nehru, in his arrogance and hubris and misleading guidance from his military advisors, decided to reject that and took on a very aggressive line, what they call the forward policy. So there's something basically fundamentally wrong. And now when Modi came, as you know, even before his election, he talked about following a very muscular policy against all the neighbors, particularly Pakistan and particularly China. So I think Modi has been very foolish. There talk about two-front situation, in fact, 2.5-front position. It's absolutely ridiculous. India is certainly a big military power. I don't think they have that kind of capacity, that kind of capability. And if they want to take on a kind of a two-front situation, I think they will really regret it all their life. So I think India is just not interested in settling with neighbors. Now, let me say something perhaps a little aggressive note here. We must call for India vacating all territories it has occupied of other countries. We should ask for the vacation of Kashmir, which of course we have to discuss. Vacation of Siachen Glacier. I think China has very legitimate claims right across the border that is disputed between India and China. There's no reason why we should not support the Chinese on their problem with India.
No, I think that's the position taken by the government of Pakistan, and I agree with you. I mean, one doesn't need to be apologetic about any of this, and history, frankly, is on the side of India's neighbors. Interestingly enough, they were even prepared to discuss Tawang, but now Tawang is off the table, and that particular 1959 sort of quid pro quo that China wanted is also off the table. But thank you so much. That was Ambassador Riaz Khokhar speaking with us and giving us his insights. Before I wrap up, let me go back to AVM Faaiz Amir here. AVM Amir, You talked about, expanding the envelope outwards. There is also the issue of other capabilities, because, as you know, today's military theater is essentially like the internet of military things, where everything is connected. So there's also the element of cyber capabilities by China. And give me some sense of how that could impact any aerial engagement.
Well, if you look at the February 7th, 2019, the aerial battle between Pakistan Air Force and the Indian Air Force, one thing that clearly came out was that the Indian Air Force was not geared up to network-centric warfare. It means their own Su-30s and other aircraft that were flying, they were not networking with each other. That's a major problem at the moment the Indian Air Force has, and that will remain the problem, or maybe exaggerate the problem when Rafales come in, and that's a different technology, and they're not going to talk to the Russian Su-30s or any other aircraft that the Indians have. Now, when you look at the Chinese capabilities, they probably are far ahead of India in electronic warfare. And recently, probably a couple of months back, they displayed it in South China Sea when they jammed every other electronic operating equipment over there. So I think the Chinese have a much more capability in cyber warfare, and that cyber warfare, when the war starts, I think much before that, the forces will start indulging into cyber activities.
Correct.
And in those activities, I think the Chinese definitely outpace the Indians.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was Air Vice Marshal Faaiz Amir speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to talk about the third phase clinical trials of a Chinese vaccine to be tested in Pakistan. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about the announcement by the National Command and Operations Center that phase 3 clinical trials of a Chinese vaccine have begun in Pakistan. The vaccine is developed by China's CanSino Biologics. Trials for phase 1 and 2 for the vaccine were held in China. Pakistan, under a public-private partnership between the National Institute of Health and CanSino, is among the countries which will carry out phase 3 trials. Planning, Development and Special Initiatives Minister Asad Umar said that 40,000 people will participate in the trial, which is being held in 7 countries across the world. Around 8,000 to 10,000 of these will be from Pakistan. To discuss this further, we are joined by Dr. Shapa. Professor Mirza teaches at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, and her specialized areas include immunology and bacterial pathogenesis. We also have with us Dr. Javed, Hayat Khan, who is a pulmonologist and has dealt with COVID-19 patients during this crisis. Let me begin with Professor Mirza. Professor Mirza, what is your immediate reading of this decision?
I think that that's a good idea that the National Institute of Health is conducting these trials, because in our previous program, when we were talking about the time it takes to synthesize this vaccine, we also talked about different ethnicities, and it should be tested in different genders, ethnicities, and different age groups. So if we are the recipients of this vaccine, if we are to receive this vaccine at some point in time, I think it is important that it should be tested in our population. So I would think of it as a good step towards launching the vaccine. Pre-launch of this vaccine does require some human studies, and I would think that it will be good for Pakistan if Pakistanis are to receive this vaccine at some point in time.
Right. The program that you mentioned, in that program we had also discussed that vaccines take a long time, almost a decade. Now, given that, do you think that is this a rush job, or is it, does the timeline make sense?
I think it is moving a little bit faster. I think it is moving a little bit faster, but to their defense, they are using a technology that they had already used for their previous vaccine. So I think they're pretty confident about the stuff that they're using, about the methodology that they're using. The only thing that is different is that they're putting a different construct in it. So instead of using common cold, they're putting a spike protein from coronavirus into it. And because this is an established technology and they have previously used it and they have tested it, the whole issue of using newer methods or newer technologies and the fear that it might not work and the fear that it might not be safe for people has already been taken care of. So I personally think that it is still a little bit faster. I think they should have taken a little bit more time to test it in maybe cell lines or in maybe different populations like animal models or not just cell lines, but in other life models before they put it in human. But I think they are confident because they have used this model previously as well, that this is going to work in human. And then they have opened it for their army. So they have already injected it in their army or vaccinated their army. So I'm sure that they have a lot of data on how those people reacted to the vaccine. So I would say that given the need and knowing that this technology is something that they already had and they're just building up on this technology, I would say that time is still short. It's kind of tight. So my honest response will be that it's a very dicey situation.
So tell our viewers, how does this actually work, this development of a vaccine? So is this like a dead virus? Is this like a live weakened virus that's injected? What exactly is the methodology?
So different vaccines are developed differently. In this particular vaccine, there is no virus. There is a small component of virus that they have actually hooked to a virus which is normally present in human body, but it is unable to replicate in human body. And if the virus don't replicate in human body, they cannot cause infection. So it's not a live or a dead virus, but they have taken a component of coronavirus and it's like patching. So they took a piece of coronavirus and they put it in this vector, and now the vector is being given to human. So there is no coronavirus that's being given to human. That virus, or a part of that virus, is being carried on another vector which is unable to replicate in the human host. And once it gets inside the body, then it replicates and it produces that particular protein. And that protein is then carried to some immune cells, where these immune cells detect this protein, they mount an immune response to it, and as a result of that immune response, you have a decent amount of antibody titer, which is assumed to be protective.
So given obviously the crisis situation that the world has gone through, we are obviously talking about vaccines, but once you have a vaccine, then there are at least two other issues. As a layperson that I could identify, one is, of course, what percentage of population would actually be protected by this, because there's got to be 100%. I don't think effectiveness is likely. And secondly, for how long would someone, after having been vaccinated, would stay protected?
So these are both very valid questions, and I think that they need to be answered if you are administering a new vaccine in a population. What percentage of the population will be protected, and for that they need to include all kinds of groups. They need to include people with comorbid conditions, they need to include children, they need to have adults, and they need to have elderly. And if it generates equal amount of immunity in all of these people, and that immunity turns out to be protective immunity, then we can comfortably say that 90% of our population will be protected. And for some infectious diseases, the protective immunity is lifelong. But for some, it doesn't last very long because the virus or the bacteria mutate at a rate that they change very frequently. So if you get infected the second time, and if you get infected with the same virus, you are very lucky because you already have protective immunity. If you get infected by a similar virus which is not identical to the previous one, then there is this thing that is called cross protection. So there is a possibility that by virtue of cross protection, you still have some protection against the new virus. But if the new virus is totally different, then we are at a loss because there is a chance that we might not be protected against the disease. And also, it depends on how long this immunity lasts. So whether it's going to develop memory or not, whether they will, whether the titer that they are producing right now or that they are eliciting right now is going to survive for 5 years, 6 years, or 10 years, we don't know. Only the time will tell.
Only time. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Shapar Mirza speaking with us. Let me go over to Dr. Javed Hayat Khan. Dr. Khan, the Oxford vaccine trials were paused, as you know, after some severe side effects in some patients. Do we have the mechanisms in place to monitor how these trials are going and what the results are?
Well, if you look at the standard procedures of any drug trials, they are very closely monitored, not just the one who are conducting the trial, but a third party as well. So every single side effect which the patient complains is registered, and it is always gone to the monitoring party. And they have the powers to halt the trial wherever they feel that there's a necessity that there's some risk involved in the trial. So since this trial is being conducted in 8 other countries now, there will be a monitoring body who will be overseeing this trial. In Pakistan, as I understand, they are conducting in 3 different cities in Karachi, in Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi, around 6, I think, institutions. So they will all be monitored. It's always very important for any drug when they are going into phase 3 trial that they should be observed very closely. I have participated in those trials, and every single symptom and sign is monitored, documented, and it is reported to the monitoring body.
So the sample has to have different age groups and the gender differences also, so that there is a mixed sample, and then you see how various people are getting impacted by the vaccine?
That's true. But they already published a study way back in Lancet, which is a very good scientific journal, about 500 people. They have published their study in terms of the safety and also in terms of the efficacy as well. The efficacy was not very great, especially over the age of 50. So I think that concern is there. This is the age population which is more vulnerable, and most of the vaccines are recommended for this age group, elderly age group. In this particular vaccine case, it was not very protective in that age group. Yes, they have to conduct in all kind of ages and genders to see the effectiveness. The second concern about this vaccination is, Professor Mirza mentioned, it is being carried by a vector, which is the adenovirus, common cold virus, that carries into the body. And now, the body may develop antibodies against that vector, which is carrying this adenovirus. They are already present in the community as well. So this is some of the concerns. How effective will be the immunity of this virus? In this study, Lancet, I have mentioned today, it varies from 40% to 70%. It's not very 100% protective. So that will be a very big issue. If something is not really very effective, 40%, and that has been the argument in most of the cases, other viruses as well, like a flu vaccination, people are advised to. If you are not getting 100% protection, or say 60, 70% protection, but at least they can modify the course of the disease. The disease will not be that severe. So that's one argument can go. Yeah, sure, answer is yes, it has to be tested against all segments, different kind of genders, to make it more efficacious and safe as in the third phase trial, phase 3 trial.
Right. So one final question, Dr. Khan. What we have seen now is that although cases are rising still in the US and Brazil and India, But the other observation is that the morbidity and the mortality rates are dropping, even in Brazil, in the US and India and elsewhere. Now, going by that, do you think that after a while we would even require this vaccine?
Let's hope so. We don't need it. It could be just like another common cold virus. But when it started, as you rightly mentioned, the mortality in ICU was something 80 to 90% once you go on the ventilator, which has dropped down to 30% now. The world has learned a lot over the last 7-8 months about this virus and how it causes the disease, how it causes a complication, how we can deal with it. But now we know that it's the same kind of ARDS in the lung is caused the same kind of problem that other viruses has been causing. Yes, definitely it may be another virus, like now we don't hear much of H1N1.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a deadly.
Correct.
Now, when you run through testing, you find, oh, yes, he had a H1N1. But so what? I mean, you take H1N1 and just ignore it. It's just a more academic exercise than actually our treatment kind of exercise. We hope it will be like that. This is also a concern. That's why they are rushing into it, all the big pharma, that bring it very quickly so it can be used on the people. Maybe 1 year, 2 years down the road, it will be a history.
Absolutely. Let's hope that it is history. Thank you so much, Dr. Javed Ejaz Khan. As always, this is all from In Focus this week. We shall see you next Monday. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.